The discovery came, like most revelations in the archive world, by accident. Dr. Elena Marchetti was cataloging a recently acquired collection of 18th-century Venetian documents when her white cotton gloves paused over a leather portfolio bearing the familiar signature of Giovanni Battista Piranesi. Inside, nestled between his renowned architectural etchings, lay something that defied explanation. Images that possessed an uncanny photographic quality, complete with tonal gradations and detail that seemed impossible for the 1750s. The first image showed the interior of the Pantheon in Rome, but unlike Piranesi's famous etching of the same subject, this version captured subtle plays of light and shadow across the coffered dome with a precision that made Elena's breath catch. The paper was unmistakably 18th century. She had handled enough period documents to recognize the weight and texture, yet the image quality belonged to an era decades before Louis Daguerre would announce his photographic process to the world. Elena's initial assumption was that someone had mislabeled a 19th century daguerreotype, but the paper analysis told a different story. Carbon dating confirmed what her eyes had already suspected. The substrate was manufactured sometime between 1745 and 1760. The binding, the watermarks, even the iron gall ink used for Piranesi's marginal notes all pointed to the same conclusion. These images were created during the artist's lifetime, in an age when photography was supposedly impossible. Word of the discovery spread through academic circles with the velocity of scandal. Dr. James Hartford, a leading authority on early photographic processes from Cambridge, arrived in Venice within a week, armed with portable spectroscopy equipment and decades of skepticism. His examination revealed silver particles embedded in the paper fibers, arranged in patterns that suggested light-sensitive chemical reactions. Yet the binding agents and paper composition predated the known development of silver halide photography by nearly a century. It's as if someone took a modern gelatin silver print and somehow transferred it onto 18th century paper, Hartford muttered, adjusting his spectroscope for the third time that morning. But that's impossible. The chemistry simply didn't exist. The implications rippled through the art history community like stones thrown into still water. If authentic, these images suggested that photographic technology had been developed and then lost decades before its supposed invention. But authentication proved maddeningly elusive. Every test confirmed the age of the materials while revealing techniques that shouldn't have existed. Dr. Sarah Chun, a specialist in historical chemistry from the University of Chicago, approached the problem from a different angle. She began investigating the social circles surrounding Piranesi in mid-18th century Rome, focusing on the intersection of artistic innovation and early scientific experimentation. What she discovered was a network of intellectuals, artists, and natural philosophers who regularly exchanged ideas about optics, chemistry, and the mechanical arts. Among Piranesi's documented associates was Cardinal Alessandro Albani, a passionate collector who maintained laboratories in his villa for studying ancient artifacts. Albani employed several scholars with interests in natural philosophy, including a mysterious figure known only as Il Chimico, the chemist, who appears in correspondence but whose full identity remains unknown. More intriguing still were references to secret experiments involving the capture of shadows and mechanical drawing by light. The breakthrough came when Chun discovered a fragmentary manuscript in the Vatican secret archives, filed under miscellaneous 18th century correspondence. The document, written in Latin with Italian marginal notes, described a process for fixing the images of the camera obscura upon prepared papers through the agency of lunar salts. The handwriting matched samples from Piranesi's workshop, though whether written by the master himself or an associate remained unclear. The manuscript described a process that sounded remarkably like early photography. Silver compounds dissolved in wine, papers treated with this solution and dried in darkness, exposure within a camera obscura, and development using what appeared to be an early reducing agent derived from oak galls. Most tantalizing of all, The document referenced experiments conducted in the underground chambers where the ancient Romans once stored grain, suggesting the use of the Roman catacombs as darkrooms. Yet attempts to replicate the described process met with limited success. Modern researchers, working from the fragmentary instructions, managed to create light-sensitive papers that responded to exposure, but their results lacked the extraordinary detail and tonal range of the disputed Piranesi images. Either crucial steps had been omitted from the manuscript, or the process relied on materials or techniques that had been lost to time. The mystery deepened when infrared analysis revealed hidden marks beneath the visible images, construction lines, and geometric guides that suggested these weren't simply photographic reproductions of existing views, but carefully composed architectural studies. Someone had combined photographic capture with traditional artistic planning, creating hybrid works that blurred the boundaries between mechanical reproduction and artistic creation. Professor Maria Rossi, a specialist in Piranesi studies from the University of Rome, noted that this approach would have aligned perfectly with the artist's documented interests in archaeological accuracy. Piranesi had built his reputation on meticulously precise architectural documentation, often spending months measuring and sketching ancient buildings. A photographic process would have been an invaluable tool for capturing details that even the most skilled draftsman might miss. Piranesi was obsessed with accuracy, Rossi explained during a heated conference session in Florence. He criticized other artists for their archaeological liberties, for adding romantic embellishments to ancient structures. If he had access to a photographic process, he would have embraced it as the ultimate tool for truthful documentation. The debate took on new dimensions when similar images surfaced in private collections across Europe. A Swiss collector produced what appeared to be Piranesi photographs of ruins in Paestum. A German museum discovered 3 images of Roman aqueducts in a portfolio they had attributed to anonymous 18th-century artists. Each discovery followed the same pattern: extraordinary photographic quality, period-appropriate materials, and provenance that traced back to Italy in the 1750s and 1760s. Dr. Hartford found himself reluctantly reconsidering his initial skepticism. The evidence is accumulating in ways that make forgery increasingly implausible, he admitted. Creating even one convincing fake would require extraordinary skill and resources. Creating dozens scattered across different collections with consistent material properties, it strains credibility. The scientific community remained divided. Skeptics pointed out that extraordinary claims required extraordinary evidence, and that the history of art forgery was littered with technically sophisticated fakes that had initially fooled experts. The absence of any contemporary written accounts of photographic processes seemed particularly damning. Surely, such a revolutionary development would have generated considerable commentary and documentation. Yet supporters of authenticity argued that 18th-century intellectual culture often operated through secretive networks and coded communications. Alchemical and natural philosophical research was frequently conducted in private, with discoveries shared only among trusted associates. If Piranesi or his collaborators had developed an early photographic process, they might have deliberately kept it secret to maintain their competitive advantage in architectural documentation. The investigation took an unexpected turn when renovations at the Palazzo al Temps in Rome uncovered a sealed chamber that had apparently been forgotten for centuries. Among the contents were glass vessels containing crystalline residues, metal plates with faint image traces, and wooden camera-like devices fitted with lenses. Carbon dating placed these artifacts in the mid-18th century, precisely the period when the mysterious photographic images had supposedly been created. Chemical analysis of the residues revealed complex silver compounds mixed with organic materials derived from plant sources. The metal plates showed traces of light-sensitive coatings, while the camera devices demonstrated sophisticated understanding of optics and light management. Most remarkably, several partially completed images were found on metal substrates, showing the same architectural subjects and composition style as the disputed paper photographs. Dr. Chun led the analysis of these new discoveries, working with an international team of chemists, physicists, and art historians. Their findings suggested a photographic process that combined silver-based chemistry with organic light-sensitive compounds derived from Mediterranean plants. The technique appeared to require extended exposure times, possibly hours rather than minutes, which would have limited its practical applications, but could have produced the extraordinary image quality observed in the surviving examples. What we're seeing is essentially a parallel development of photography, Chun explained to a packed auditorium at the International Conference on Historical Technology. While the chemicals and techniques differ from the silver halide processes that dominated the 19th century, the underlying principles are remarkably similar. Light-sensitive compounds, camera obscura exposure, chemical development, all the basic elements are present. The discovery of the palazzo chamber also provided potential explanations for why this early photographic technology had apparently vanished. Contemporary accounts described a fire that destroyed much of Cardinal Albani's collection in 1769, just as political upheavals across Europe disrupted the networks of scholarly correspondence that had facilitated experimental collaboration. The knowledge may have been lost along with the physical apparatus and written records. Moreover, the technical demands of the process may have made it impractical for widespread adoption. Modern attempts to replicate the chamber techniques suggested that creating a single successful image required considerable skill, expensive materials, and favorable environmental conditions. Unlike the more robust photographic processes developed in the 19th century, this early technique appears to have been fragile and difficult to scale beyond experimental use. The authentication debate continued to rage in academic journals and conference presentations. Advanced forensic analysis revealed no evidence of modern materials or anachronistic techniques, yet the extraordinary nature of the claims made many scholars uncomfortable with accepting the evidence at face value. The scientific principle of extraordinary claims requiring extraordinary evidence seemed to conflict with the accumulating weight of consistent findings. A turning point came when Dr. Elena Marchetti, who had made the original discovery, located additional manuscripts in the Biblioteca Ambrosiana in Milan. These documents, filed under alchemical treatises, contained detailed recipes for light-sensitive preparations along with sketches of camera-like devices. The handwriting analysis suggested multiple contributors working within Piranesi's circle, indicating that the photographic experiments had been collaborative rather than the work of a single inventor. One manuscript in particular provided the missing pieces needed for a successful replication. It described a multi-stage coating process that combined silver compounds with light-sensitive organic materials extracted from specific Mediterranean lichens. The document also detailed optimal exposure conditions and development techniques that modern researchers have been unable to deduce from incomplete earlier sources. Using these more complete instructions, a team at the Institute for Advanced Historical Research successfully created images that closely approximated the quality and characteristics of the disputed Piranesi photographs. While their modern materials and equipment prevented perfect replication of 18th century conditions, the results demonstrated that the described techniques could indeed produce photographic images of remarkable quality. We're not claiming to have solved every mystery, admitted Dr. Marchetti as she presented the team's findings. But we've demonstrated that photographic technology was technically feasible in the mid-18th century using materials and knowledge available to Piranesi and his associates. Whether our specific images are authentic remains a matter for individual judgment, but the possibility can no longer be dismissed as an anachronistic impossibility. The implications extended far beyond art history. If photographic technology had indeed been developed and lost in the 18th century, it suggested that the linear progression of technological innovation might be more complex than traditionally assumed. Knowledge could be gained and lost, discoveries made and forgotten, entire technological paths explored and abandoned before being rediscovered decades or centuries later. The story also highlighted the interconnected nature of 18th century intellectual culture, where artists, scientists, and scholars regularly collaborated across disciplinary boundaries. Piranesi's architectural work had always demonstrated unusual technical precision and scientific rigor. The possibility that he had access to photographic documentation tools provided new context for understanding his achievements. Museum exhibitions began incorporating the discovery into broader narratives about the relationship between art and technology. The Palazzo dell'Esposizione in Rome mounted a major show exploring hidden technologies of the Enlightenment, while the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York featured the disputed images alongside traditional Piranesi etchings, inviting viewers to compare the different approaches to architectural documentation. Popular interest in the mystery grew as science journalists and documentarians picked up the story. The combination of artistic genius, lost technology, and scholarly detective work proved irresistible to audiences fascinated by historical puzzles. Television programs explored the chambers beneath Rome, while magazine articles speculated about other potentially lost innovations waiting to be rediscovered in archives and archaeological sites. Yet significant questions remained unanswered. If the photographic process had been successfully developed, why had it been abandoned rather than refined and improved? The technical challenges alone seemed insufficient explanation, given the obvious advantages for architectural and archaeological documentation. Political disruption and the loss of key knowledge holders provided partial answers, but the complete disappearance of such a valuable technology suggested other factors at work. Some scholars propose that the process might have been deliberately suppressed, either by competing artists threatened by its implications for traditional draftsmanship, or by political authorities concerned about its potential applications for surveillance and intelligence gathering. The camera obscura had long been viewed with suspicion by those who associated mechanical image-making with unnatural or potentially dangerous practices. Others suggested that the process might not have been entirely lost, but rather transformed and absorbed into other artistic techniques. The extraordinary precision of certain late 18th century architectural drawings and archaeological illustrations might reflect the continued influence of photographic methods, even if the direct production of photographic images had ceased. The economic context also demanded consideration. Photographic image production, even with refined techniques, would have required significant investment in materials and equipment. The market for such images would have been limited to wealthy collectors and scholarly institutions, providing little incentive for commercial development. Traditional etching and engraving already served most practical documentation needs a considerably lower cost. As research continued, the focus gradually shifted from authentication debates to broader questions about technological innovation and historical methodology. Whether or not the specific images attributed to Piranesi were authentic, the discovery had demonstrated that photographic technology was technically feasible in the 18th century and had quite possibly been experimented with by artists and scholars of the period. The case also highlighted the challenges facing historians attempting to reconstruct lost knowledge from fragmentary evidence. Traditional documentary sources often failed to preserve information about experimental techniques, particularly those that were considered proprietary or were associated with secretive intellectual networks. Archaeological evidence could provide crucial insights, but interpreting physical artifacts without written context remained difficult and contentious. Modern scientific analysis offered powerful tools for authentication and technical reconstruction, yet the extraordinary nature of the claims required multiple independent confirmations before acceptance. The scientific method's emphasis on reproducibility conflicted with the unique nature of historical artifacts, creating methodological tensions that extended beyond this specific case. The Piranesi photography mystery became a touchstone for discussions about the relationship between art and science in historical periods. Rather than viewing these as distinct domains, The case suggested that 18th century intellectual culture fostered extensive collaboration between artists and natural philosophers, leading to innovations that transcended traditional disciplinary boundaries. Educational institutions began incorporating the discovery into courses on the history of technology, the methodology of historical research, and the complex relationship between artistic and scientific innovation. Students found the combination of technical analysis, historical detective work, and unresolved questions particularly engaging, using the case to explore broader themes about knowledge production and preservation. The Vatican's decision to digitize and make publicly available the relevant manuscript from the secret archives provided new opportunities for collaborative research. Scholars from around the world could now examine the original documents, leading to fresh interpretations and additional discoveries. The crowdsourced analysis revealed details that individual researchers had missed, demonstrating the value of collaborative approaches to historical research. International museums began coordinating their research efforts, sharing technical data and comparative analyses. The Metropolitan Museum, the British Museum, the Uffizi, and other major institutions established a joint database for documenting and analyzing potentially related artifacts. This collaborative approach accelerated the pace of discovery while ensuring more rigorous standards for authentication and interpretation. The story continued to evolve as new evidence emerged from unexpected sources. Private collectors, inspired by media coverage of the discovery, began submitting their own artifacts for analysis. Some proved to be conventional 18th century artworks, but others displayed characteristics consistent with the disputed photographic process. Each new discovery added to the growing body of evidence, while raising fresh questions about the scope and duration of these experimental activities. Conservation scientists developed new techniques for analyzing historical artifacts without causing damage, allowing for more detailed investigation of disputed materials. Advanced imaging technologies revealed previously invisible details, while improved chemical analysis could detect trace materials that earlier investigations had missed. These technological advances promise to provide increasingly definitive answers to authentication questions. The intersection of advanced modern science with historical artifacts created fascinating methodological challenges. Researchers had to account for the aging and degradation of materials over centuries, while distinguishing between original techniques and subsequent alterations or contamination. The collaborative effort required expertise spanning chemistry, physics, art history, archaeology, and conservation science. Commercial applications also emerged from the research. Modern photographers and artists experimented with recreating historical techniques, leading to new artistic movements that combined contemporary sensibilities with reconstructed historical processes. Art supply manufacturers developed specialty materials for artists interested in exploring these hybrid approaches to image making. The discovery influenced broader discussions about the nature of technological progress. Rather than viewing innovation as a simple linear development, the case suggested that knowledge could be gained, lost, and regained in complex patterns influenced by social, economic, and political factors. This perspective encouraged more nuanced approaches to understanding the relationship between past and present technological capabilities. Museums faced new challenges in presenting contested materials to the public. How should they display artifacts whose authenticity remained disputed? Exhibition designers developed innovative approaches that acknowledged uncertainty while still engaging audiences with the fascinating questions raised by the discoveries. Interactive displays allowed visitors to explore the evidence and draw their own conclusions about the competing theories. The educational impact extended beyond formal academic settings. Science museums incorporated the story into exhibits about the history of photography and scientific method. Art museums used the case to explore the relationship between artistic and technological innovation. History museums highlighted the detective work involved in reconstructing lost knowledge. Documentary evidence continued to emerge from archives across Europe as researchers systematically examined 18th century manuscripts and correspondence. Each new discovery provided additional context for understanding the intellectual networks that might have supported experimental photographic work. The cumulative effect strengthened the case for serious consideration of the photographic hypothesis, even as individual pieces of evidence remained open to interpretation. The Piranesi case ultimately transcended its specific historical claims to become a meditation on the nature of knowledge, innovation, and historical understanding. Whether or not Giovanni Battista Piranesi actually created photographs in the 18th century, the investigation had revealed the complex and interconnected nature of Enlightenment intellectual culture, where boundaries between art, science, and technology remained fluid and permeable. The mystery persisted, neither fully resolved nor definitively dismissed. New evidence continued to accumulate. New questions emerged from each discovery, and the debate evolved as research techniques improved and scholarly perspective shifted. In many ways, the ongoing nature of the investigation embodied the spirit of Enlightenment inquiry that had originally motivated Piranesi and his contemporaries, a restless curiosity about the world and the technical means for understanding and representing it. The legacy of the discovery extended far beyond the specific question of 18th century photography. It had demonstrated the value of interdisciplinary collaboration, the importance of preserving and making accessible historical archives, and the continued potential for surprising discoveries that challenge conventional understanding of the past. Whether the disputed images proved authentic or not, they had succeeded in opening new windows into the rich experimental culture of the Enlightenment and the complex pathways through which human knowledge develops and sometimes disappears. Perhaps most importantly, the case reminded scholars and the public that history remained full of mysteries waiting to be explored, that the past was more complex and surprising than traditional narratives suggested, and that the careful application of modern analytical techniques could still yield remarkable insights into the achievements and aspirations of earlier generations. In that sense, regardless of their ultimate authenticity, the Piranesi photographs had already achieved their most significant impact, inspiring a renewed appreciation for the ingenuity and experimental spirit that had always characterized human efforts to understand and represent the world. The investigation entered a new phase when construction workers renovating the basement of the Villa Giulia in Rome uncovered a hidden chamber that had been sealed behind a false wall for over 2 centuries. The space, accessed through a narrow passage that had been concealed during 19th century modifications to the building, contained what appeared to be an intact 18th century laboratory. Dust-covered tables held glass apparatus arranged as if the experimenters had simply stepped away for a moment, intending to return shortly. Dr. Alessandro Fontana, the archaeologist called to examine the discovery, found himself transported into what seemed like a time capsule from the age of Enlightenment experimentation. The chamber contained not only chemical apparatus, but also optical devices, including several camera obscuras of varying sizes and degrees of sophistication. Most remarkably, wooden cabinets lined with lead sheets held hundreds of glass plates, many bearing faint but discernible images of Roman architecture. The discovery sent shockwaves through the international research community. Here was physical evidence of a photographic workshop operating in the mid-18th century, complete with the apparatus, chemicals, and results of extensive experimentation. The glass plates, when examined under proper lighting conditions, revealed images of extraordinary clarity and detail, views of the Forum Romanum, interior studies of the Pantheon, and architectural details from monuments across Rome. Carbon dating of organic materials found in the chamber consistently pointed to the 1750s and 1760s, precisely the period when the disputed paper photographs had supposedly been created. More significantly, several of the glass plate images corresponded exactly to the controversial paper prints, proving that they had been created from the same original captures. The authentication debate shifted dramatically as skeptics found themselves confronting not just isolated artifacts, but an entire production facility. Dr. Chun led the international team assembled to study the chamber's contents. Their analysis revealed a sophisticated understanding of chemistry and optics that far exceeded what had been documented in contemporary scientific literature. The apparatus suggested years of systematic experimentation, with multiple generations of equipment showing progressive refinement of technique. This was clearly not the work of amateur dabblers, but of serious investigators pursuing photographic technology with scientific rigor. The chemical analysis proved particularly revealing. The sealed containers held residues of silver compounds combined with organic light-sensitive materials derived from Mediterranean plants, confirming the recipes found in the Milan manuscripts. But the chamber also contained more advanced formulations, suggesting that the experimenters had continued developing their techniques well beyond what the written records had preserved. Among the most significant discoveries was a detailed journal written in Latin and Italian, documenting experiments conducted between 1752 and 1767. The author, who identified himself only with the initials GM, described the gradual development of photographic techniques from initial failures to increasingly successful results. The journal entries revealed both the excitement of discovery and the frustration of setbacks, providing an intimate glimpse into the experimental process. The journal described collaboration with the Venetian master, whose architectural drawings required unprecedented accuracy for archaeological documentation. While no names were mentioned explicitly, the description matched what was known about Piranesi's working methods and his documented obsession with precise architectural measurement. More tellingly, several journal entries referenced specific Roman monuments that featured prominently in Piranesi's published works. Dr. Marchetti, working with paleographic specialists, identified subtle similarities between the journal handwriting and marginal notes found in documented Piranesi manuscripts. While not definitively proving authorship, the evidence suggested close collaboration between the journal's author and Piranesi's workshop. The technical precision of the architectural observations also aligned with the level of expertise demonstrated in Piranesi's engravings. The chamber discovery revolutionized understanding of 18th century scientific culture in Rome. Rather than isolated experiments by curious amateurs, the photographic work appeared to be part of a systematic investigation supported by wealthy patrons and conducted with institutional backing. References in the journal to the Cardinal's Commission and funding from the Venetian collector suggested that the photographic experiments had attracted serious financial support from influential figures. Research into the villa's history revealed that it had been owned by Cardinal Alessandro Albani during the relevant period, confirming the connection to the intellectual network that had previously been identified through documentary research. Albani's well-documented interest in archaeological accuracy and his employment of scholars specializing in natural philosophy provided the institutional context for sustained experimental work. The physical evidence also explained why the photographic technology had apparently vanished so completely. The journal's final entries, dated to early 1767, described increasing political pressure and concerns about the implications of their discoveries. References to suspicion from the authorities and necessity of concealment suggested that the experimenters had deliberately hidden their work as political conditions in the Papal States became increasingly restrictive. The journal's author wrote of plans to preserve the apparatus until more favorable times and expressed hope that future investigators would rediscover these arts when the world is ready for such innovations. The systematic concealment of the chamber and its contents appear to be a deliberate effort to preserve the technology for future generations, rather than simply abandoning failed experiments. This revelation reframed the entire historical narrative surrounding early photography. Rather than viewing the 19th century development of photographic techniques as the first successful attempts at mechanical image capture, scholars began considering the possibility that earlier innovations had been deliberately suppressed or lost due to political and social pressures. The implications extended far beyond art history to touch on broader questions about the relationship between innovation and social acceptance. The chamber also contained correspondence with scholars across Europe, revealing an international network of investigators working on related problems. Letters from Paris, Vienna, and London discussed experiments with light-sensitive materials and mechanical image capture, suggesting that the Roman work was part of a broader European investigation into what would later become photography. The isolation of individual researchers, each working independently on similar problems, may have prevented the critical mass of knowledge needed for widespread adoption. Dr. Hartford, whose initial skepticism had gradually given way to cautious acceptance, found himself confronting irrefutable evidence of 18th century photographic technology. "We're not dealing with a few anomalous artifacts," he admitted during a packed presentation at the Royal Photographic Society in London. "We're looking at a systematic photographic practice that operated for at least 15 years, produced hundreds of images, and achieved technical results that weren't surpassed until the mid-19th century." The discovery prompted a comprehensive reevaluation of other disputed artifacts in museum collections worldwide. Images that had been dismissed as impossible anachronisms were re-examined using the new understanding of 18th century photographic capabilities. The Hermitage in St. Petersburg identified several glass plates with photographic characteristics among their collection of 18th century curiosities. The Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam found similar materials filed under unknown scientific instruments from a period. Each new identification added to the growing evidence of a lost photographic tradition that had operated across multiple European centers during the mid-18th century. The scale of the rediscovered technology suggested that its disappearance represented a significant setback in the development of visual documentation, with implications that extended well beyond artistic practice to include scientific observation, archaeological documentation, and architectural analysis. Modern attempts to fully replicate the chamber techniques proved challenging but ultimately successful. Using the complete apparatus and chemical formulations found in the villa, researchers at the International Center for Photographic Research created images that were virtually indistinguishable from the 18th century originals. The replication confirmed that the discovered technology was indeed capable of producing the extraordinary results documented in museum collections. The successful replication also revealed why the technology had proven so difficult to maintain. The process required exceptional skill, expensive materials, and precisely controlled conditions. Unlike the more robust photographic techniques developed in the 19th century, this earlier approach was extremely sensitive to environmental variations and demanded constant attention from highly trained operators. The loss of key practitioners would have made continuation of the work nearly impossible. Economic analysis suggested additional reasons for the technology's disappearance. The cost of materials and the time required for image production would have limited the market to wealthy collectors and scholarly institutions. Without broader commercial applications, there would have been little incentive for the substantial investment needed to refine and scale the technology. The political disruptions of the late 18th century had simply accelerated the abandonment of what was already an economically marginal practice. The chamber discovery also shed new light on the intellectual culture of 18th century Rome. The sophistication of the apparatus and the systematic nature of the experimentation revealed a level of scientific organization that traditional histories had understated. Rather than viewing the period as primarily focused on classical revival and artistic production, scholars began recognizing it as an era of significant technological innovation conducted within networks that combined artistic, scientific, and archaeological interests. The collaboration between artists and natural philosophers appeared to be much more extensive than previously realized. The journal references suggested that Piranesi was not merely an isolated artistic genius, but part of an intellectual community that included experimental scientists, wealthy patrons interested in technological innovation, and scholars working on problems that cross traditional disciplinary boundaries. This collaborative approach may have been crucial to achieving the breakthrough insights needed for photographic development. The international correspondence found in the chamber revealed similar collaborative networks operating across Europe. Scholars in different cities were sharing technical knowledge, comparing results, and building upon each other's discoveries in ways that accelerated innovation. The fragmentation of these networks during the political upheavals of the late 18th century may have been as significant as any technical limitations in explaining why the photographic technology was lost. Dr. Chen's team made another crucial discovery when they analyzed the plant materials used in the light-sensitive preparations. The specific lichens and other organic compounds have been harvested from locations around the Mediterranean, suggesting an extensive supply network that supported the photographic experiments. The loss of this supply chain, whether due to political disruption or economic changes, would have made continuation of the work impossible even if the technical knowledge had been preserved. The biological analysis also revealed that some of the light-sensitive compounds were derived from plants that had since become extinct or extremely rare due to environmental changes. This added another layer to understanding why the technology had proven impossible to reconstruct based solely on written descriptions. The complete replication required not just recovering the technical knowledge, but also locating biological materials with the specific chemical properties needed for the photographic process. Conservation efforts expanded to include preserving not just the historical artifacts, but also the biological resources that had made the original work possible. Botanical gardens across Europe began cultivating the identified plant species, while biochemists worked to understand the specific compounds that had provided the light sensitivity essential to the photographic process. This effort connected historical research with contemporary environmental science in unexpected ways. The chamber investigation also revealed evidence of other lost technologies that had been developed alongside the photographic work. Glassmaking techniques that produced exceptionally clear and uniform plates, metalworking methods that created precisely ground lenses, and chemical preparations that stabilized light-sensitive materials all represented innovations that had disappeared along with the photographic technology itself. The interdependent nature of these various technical advances helped explain why the entire system had proven so fragile. Art historians began re-evaluating Piranesi's published works in light of the photographic discoveries. Details in his etchings that had seemed impossibly precise for hand-drawing now appeared to reflect photographic reference materials. The consistency of architectural measurements across his various views of the same monuments suggested systematic documentation that would have been greatly aided by photographic capture. Even his famous imaginary prisons showed technical precision that might have benefited from photographic studies of architectural details. The impact on Piranesi scholarship proved profound. Rather than viewing him solely as an artistic interpreter of ancient architecture, scholars began recognizing him as a pioneer of technical documentation who had access to advanced recording methods. His criticism of other artists for archaeological inaccuracy took on new meaning when viewed in the context of his possible access to photographic verification of architectural details. Museum exhibitions began incorporating the new discoveries into comprehensive presentations that explored the intersection of art, science, and technology in 18th century culture. The Palazzo dell'Esposizione expanded its earlier show to include a full reconstruction of the discovered chamber, complete with functioning apparatus that demonstrated the photographic techniques to contemporary audiences. Visitors could observe the complete process from chemical preparation through image development, gaining direct experience of the technical achievement represented by the lost technology. Educational institutions developed new curricula that used the Piranesi case to explore broader themes about innovation, knowledge preservation, and the complex relationship between technological capability and social acceptance. The story provided a compelling framework for discussing how discoveries could be lost, why innovations sometimes failed to achieve widespread adoption, and what factors determined which technologies survived to influence future development. The popular response to the discoveries proved equally significant. The combination of artistic genius, lost technology, and detective work captured public imagination in ways that generated sustained interest in both historical research and scientific methodology. Science museums reported increased attendance for exhibitions exploring the history of photography and the process of historical investigation. Documentary filmmakers produced comprehensive explorations of the discovery and its implications, while popular historians wrote accessible accounts that brought the story to broader audiences. The narrative elements, mysterious artifacts, hidden chambers, international collaboration, and unresolved questions proved perfectly suited to engaging audiences who might not otherwise be interested in art history or the history of technology. The commercial impact extended beyond academia and museums. Modern photographers and artists began experimenting with reconstructed historical techniques, leading to new artistic movements that combined contemporary sensibilities with recovered historical processes. Art supply manufacturers developed specialty materials for artists interested in exploring these hybrid approaches, while equipment makers created modern versions of the discovered apparatus for educational and artistic use. Research institutions established new programs specifically focused on investigating potentially lost technologies. The Piranesi discovery had demonstrated the value of interdisciplinary collaboration and comprehensive archaeological investigation, inspiring similar efforts to explore other historical mysteries. Teams of archaeologists, chemists, art historians, and conservation scientists began systematic investigations of sites and collections that might yield comparable discoveries. International cooperation expanded as museums and research institutions recognized the benefits of coordinated investigation. The success of the Piranesi project had required expertise from multiple countries and institutions, demonstrating that complex historical mysteries demanded collaborative approaches that transcended traditional institutional boundaries. New funding mechanisms emerged to support such collaborative efforts. The digital revolution provided new tools for sharing discoveries and coordinating research efforts. High-resolution imaging allowed scholars worldwide to examine artifacts in unprecedented detail, while chemical analysis databases enabled rapid comparison of materials and techniques across different discoveries. The democratization of access to primary materials accelerated the pace of investigation while ensuring more rigorous standards for authentication and interpretation. Yet significant questions remained unresolved, and new mysteries emerged from each discovery. The chamber investigation had answered many questions about the technical feasibility of 18th century photography, while raising fresh puzzles about the extent of the lost technology and the reasons for its disappearance. Each solved mystery seemed to reveal additional layers of complexity that demanded further investigation. The story continued to evolve as new evidence emerged from unexpected sources and previously overlooked materials received fresh examination. The investigation had become self-perpetuating, inspiring discoveries that generated new questions and fresh research directions. In many ways, the ongoing nature of the inquiry embodied the spirit of Enlightenment investigation that had originally motivated the work of Piranesi and his contemporaries. The breakthrough that would fundamentally alter understanding of the entire affair came from an unexpected quarter. Professor Klaus Weber, a specialist in 18th century German scientific instruments at the Max Planck Institute, was examining optical devices in the collection of the Deutsches Museum when he noticed peculiarities in a camera obscura that had been attributed to an unknown Bavarian craftsman of the 1760s. The device showed signs of modification for extended use, with additions that seemed designed for precise image capture rather than simple observation or drawing aid. Weber's investigation revealed that the camera had been owned by Johann Heinrich Lambert, the German physicist and mathematician who had made significant contributions to optics during the mid-18th century. Lambert's correspondence, preserved in the Berlin Academy archives, contained references to experiments with mechanical drawing by light and collaboration with the Roman architect, whose precision and documentation had impressed European scholars. The dates and descriptions aligned perfectly with the period of Piranesi's most intensive architectural work. More significantly, Weber discovered a sealed compartment within Lambert's camera that contained glass plates bearing faint but unmistakable photographic images. The plates showed German architectural subjects, Gothic cathedrals, Renaissance palaces, and ancient Roman ruins found throughout the German territories. The technical characteristics matched those found in Rome, suggesting that the photographic technology had spread far beyond its apparent Italian origins. Lambert's private papers, which Weber examined with fresh attention to photographic references, revealed an extensive correspondence network that included scholars in Rome, Paris, London, and Vienna. The letters discuss shared interests in optics, chemistry, and mechanical approaches to precise documentation. Most remarkably, several letters contained detailed technical discussions of light-sensitive preparations and exposure techniques, providing the missing theoretical framework that had supported the practical experiments discovered in Rome. The German discovery prompted a continent-wide search for similar materials in other collections. The Royal Society in London re-examined instruments donated by 18th-century fellows, discovering modified optical devices among the possessions of several members known to have corresponded with continental scholars. The Académie des Sciences in Paris found comparable materials in their historical collections, while institutions in Vienna, Prague, and Stockholm reported similar discoveries among previously uncatalogued scientific instruments. Each new discovery revealed a different aspect of what was emerging as a comprehensive European investigation into photographic technology during the 1750s and 1760s. Rather than isolated experiments by individual investigators, the evidence pointed to coordinated research conducted by an informal international network of scholars who shared technical knowledge and built upon each other's discoveries. The scope of the collaboration far exceeded anything that traditional histories had documented. Dr. Isabelle Dumont, a specialist in 18th-century scientific networks at the École des Hautes Études in Paris, undertook a systematic analysis of the correspondence patterns revealed by the various discoveries. Her research identified over 30 scholars across Europe who had participated in various aspects of the photographic investigations, ranging from theoretical work in optics and chemistry to practical experiments with image capture and development. The network included not only established figures like Lambert and the mysterious GM of the Roman journal, but also lesser-known investigators whose contributions had previously been overlooked. Natural philosophers in provincial universities, wealthy amateurs with access to expensive apparatus, and skilled craftsmen who had solved practical problems of lens grinding and chemical preparation all appear to have played essential roles in developing the technology. Dumont's analysis revealed that the network had operated with remarkable efficiency, sharing discoveries rapidly and building upon each other's work in ways that accelerated innovation. Technical breakthroughs made in one location were quickly communicated to investigators elsewhere, who could then apply the insights to their own experiments. This collaborative approach explained how such sophisticated technology could have been developed so rapidly during a period when scientific communication typically moved much more slowly. The investigation also revealed why the technology had proven so fragile despite its technical sophistication. The network depended on personal relationships between scholars who shared common interests and mutual trust. Political disruptions, religious conflicts, and the deaths of key participants could easily fragment the collaborative relationships that were essential for continued progress. The complex interdependencies that had enabled rapid innovation also made the entire system vulnerable to collapse. Evidence of this fragility emerged from correspondence dated to the late 1760s and early 1770s. Letters that had previously discussed technical achievements and shared discoveries increasingly focused on political concerns and practical difficulties. References to uncertain times and necessity for discretion suggested that the investigators were finding it increasingly difficult to continue their work openly. The 7 Years' War and its aftermath had disrupted the international scholarly networks that had supported the photographic experiments. More ominously, several letters referred to religious and political suspicions about the implications of photographic technology. Church authorities expressed concerns about mechanical image-making that seemed to bypass divine inspiration in artistic creation. Political figures worried about surveillance applications and the potential for creating false evidence through mechanical image reproduction. These concerns created pressure for investigators to abandon or conceal their work. The systematic nature of the concealment efforts became apparent as researchers examined the various hidden chambers and sealed compartments that had preserved the photographic materials. Rather than simply abandoning failed experiments, the investigators had carefully preserved their apparatus and results, apparently hoping that future generations would be able to continue the work under more favorable conditions. The preservation efforts suggested both pride in their achievements and optimism about eventual rediscovery. Dr. Weber's team made another significant discovery when they located the workshop of Master Johann Georg Brander, an Augsburg instrument maker who had supplied optical devices to scholars across Europe during the relevant period. Brander's workshop records preserved in the Augsburg City Archives documented the production of numerous specialized cameras and optical devices for customers engaged in experimental philosophy and mechanical arts of precise documentation. The workshop records provided crucial insights into the practical aspects of the photographic work that had not been apparent from the scholarly correspondence. Brander had developed specific techniques for grinding lenses with exceptional clarity and uniformity, created precision mechanisms for controlling exposure times, and produced chemical preparations that enhanced the light sensitivity of the image capture materials. His innovations had been essential to the technical success of the photographic experiments. More importantly, Brander's records revealed the commercial scale of the operation. He had produced dozens of specialized cameras and hundreds of prepared plates for customers across Europe, suggesting that photographic experimentation had been far more extensive than the surviving materials might indicate. The workshop had operated as a technical support center for the International Research Network, providing the specialized equipment and materials needed for sustained investigation. The Augsburg discovery also explained how technical knowledge had been transmitted across the network. Brander had maintained detailed technical documentation for all his products, creating instruction manuals that explained optimal usage techniques and maintenance procedures. His workshop had served as a training center where scholars could learn practical skills needed for successful experimentation. The loss of this institutional knowledge when the workshop ceased photographic production would have made continuation of the work much more difficult. Archaeological investigation of the workshop site revealed additional evidence of the sophisticated techniques that had been developed. Buried waste materials contained residues of advanced chemical preparations, while structural remains showed evidence of specialized facilities for glassworking, lens grinding, and precision metalwork. The technical capabilities far exceeded what had been documented in contemporary published sources, suggesting that much of the most advanced knowledge had been preserved only in workshop traditions. The investigation took another dramatic turn when renovations at the Château de Malmaison, near Paris, uncovered a hidden cabinet containing photographic materials that had apparently belonged to Josephine Bonaparte. The discovery was particularly significant because the materials were dated to the 1790s, well after the apparent end of the 18th century photographic experiments. The images showed views of Egyptian monuments, suggesting a connection to Napoleon's Egyptian campaign and its scientific documentation efforts. Dr. Cécile Martineau, the conservator who examined the Malmaison materials, found evidence that the photographic technology had survived the political upheavals of the late 18th century and had been applied to documentary purposes during the Egyptian expedition. Several of the images corresponded to architectural drawings published in the description de l'Égypte, but the photographic versions showed details and perspectives that were not captured in the published engravings. The Egyptian connection opened entirely new lines of investigation. Napoleon's expedition had included a substantial scientific component, with scholars and artists tasked with comprehensive documentation of Egyptian monuments and artifacts. If photographic technology had been available to the expedition members, it would have provided unprecedented accuracy in archaeological documentation. The implications for understanding the expedition's achievements and the subsequent development of Egyptology were profound. Research into the expedition's archives revealed references to mechanical arts of documentation and precision apparatus for capturing architectural details. While these terms had previously been interpreted as referring to improved drawing instruments and surveying equipment, the Malmaison discovery suggested that they might actually have described photographic apparatus. Several expedition members had backgrounds in experimental science and would have been familiar with the photographic research that had been conducted during the previous decades. The possibility that photographic documentation had been used during the Egyptian campaign prompted re-examination of the expedition's visual legacy. The extraordinary accuracy and detail of many of the published engravings might have reflected photographic reference materials rather than direct observation and drawing. This would explain both the precision of the documentation and the speed with which such comprehensive visual records have been produced during the relatively brief period of French occupation. Dr. Martineau's team found additional evidence in the form of modified cameras and chemical apparatus, among other Malmaison artifacts. The equipment showed clear evolution from the earlier European designs, with improvements that suggested continued development of the technology during the intervening decades. Rather than being completely lost, photographic techniques appeared to have been preserved and refined by small groups of practitioners who had maintained the knowledge through the turbulent years of the late 18th century. The survival and evolution of the technology raised new questions about why it had not achieved broader recognition and adoption. If photographic techniques had been available and had proven useful for important documentary projects like the Egyptian expedition, why had they remained confined to secret or semi-secret applications? The answer appeared to lie in the political and cultural climate of the period, which had created powerful incentives for concealing rather than publicizing technological innovations. Revolutionary France had been suspicious of technologies associated with the aristocratic and clerical networks that had originally developed photographic techniques. The association with figures like Cardinal Albany and other members of the European elite had made the technology politically suspect. Meanwhile, the practical advantages of photographic documentation have been recognized by military and scientific leaders who wish to maintain exclusive access to its capabilities. The secrecy surrounding the technology had also been reinforced by its potential military applications. Accurate documentation of fortifications, terrain features, and strategic locations could provide significant intelligence advantages. The same precision that made photographic documentation valuable for archaeological and artistic purposes also made it attractive for reconnaissance and surveillance. These dual-use implications had encouraged continued development within restricted circles while preventing broader dissemination. Evidence of military applications emerged from archives related to the Egyptian campaign and other French military operations of the period. References to mechanical reconnaissance and precision documentation of strategic positions appeared in contexts that suggested photographic capture of militarily relevant information. The technology that had been developed for artistic and scholarly purposes had been adapted for intelligence gathering and strategic planning. The military connection also explained why knowledge of photographic techniques had been preserved through the political upheavals that had disrupted civilian scholarly networks. Military organizations had institutional continuity and security measures that could protect sensitive technical knowledge even during periods of broader social disruption. The preservation of photographic technology within military contexts had ensured its survival while keeping it hidden from public view. Dr. Chun, who had been investigating the chemical aspects of the technology since the original discoveries, found evidence of continued innovation in the Malmaison materials. The light-sensitive preparations showed improvements that enhanced image quality and reduced exposure times. The development techniques have been refined to produce more stable and durable results. These advances suggested that work had continued on improving the technology even while it remained hidden from broader public knowledge. The technical improvements documented at Malmaison provided insights into the trajectory that photographic development might have followed if it had continued without interruption. The enhanced sensitivity and reduced exposure times addressed some of the practical limitations that had restricted the earlier technology to specialized applications. By the 1790s, photographic techniques had apparently achieved performance levels that would have made broader adoption technically feasible. Yet broader adoption had not occurred, despite these technical advances. The continuing secrecy surrounding the technology suggested that non-technical factors had been more important than practical limitations in preventing its widespread use. Political considerations, economic interests, and cultural attitudes had combined to maintain photographic technology as a closely guarded capability available only to restricted circles. The investigation revealed other locations where photographic materials had been preserved through the Revolutionary period. Country estates belonging to scholarly families contained hidden collections of apparatus and images. Monastery libraries held disguised technical manuscripts that documented photographic procedures. Private workshops, maintained by instrument makers, preserved the practical knowledge needed to produce photographic equipment. The technology had survived through a network of discrete preservation efforts rather than institutional continuity. Each new discovery added to understanding of how knowledge could be maintained outside official channels during periods of political disruption. The photographic investigations had created informal preservation networks that operated independently of universities, academies, and other formal institutions. These networks had successfully maintained both theoretical knowledge and practical capabilities across decades of social and political upheaval. The cumulative evidence painted a picture of technological development that was far more complex than traditional linear narrative suggested. Photographic technology had been developed, lost, rediscovered, improved, concealed, and preserved through multiple cycles that reflected changing political and cultural conditions. The history revealed the contingent nature of technological progress and the importance of social factors in determining which innovations achieved widespread adoption. The implications extended far beyond the specific case of early photography to broader questions about innovation, knowledge preservation, and the relationship between technological capability and social acceptance. The Piranesi investigations had revealed not just a lost technology, but a lost understanding of how technical knowledge could be developed, transmitted, and preserved under adverse conditions. The lessons were relevant for contemporary concerns about technological resilience and the preservation of critical capabilities.